Next, my pleasure is to introduce, and by the way, he received an award last night as San Ramon's Educator of the Year, given to him by the San Ramon Chamber of Commerce. It was a great ceremony done by Zoom last night. And Dr. Joseph, we all appreciate the work you've done, and I hope that you enjoy and understand how appreciative we are of what you've done for our community. And I know that you've got a little summary for us and also an update of what's going on. And I think with Candace's information, you can help put it in context for us. So, Dr. Joseph, I'm teeing you up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as always, and I've said this many times, thank you for the invitation. I always learn. I particularly enjoy the perspective of Supervisor Anderson. And I think our two discussions today will dovetail very nicely into perhaps a review of what has happened. I am going to share the screen, and we'll go through it as we can. So my intention today is to really talk about what has been a very tumultuous 2020. And that is looking at the past 11 months. And I want to start off by saying that this past 11 months has affected all of us in every phase, not just the United States, but worldwide. And my closing comment I will give as the opening comment. We really need to be proud of ourselves, of each other, of what we have done, of how far we have come in 11 months with what we have had to tolerate. And I'm going to go through some of that to try to emphasize. The most important thing is that 2020 has been a rocket ship. And so a holiday rocket ship seemed like the best way to open this. I have never in my decades of medicine, and probably most of you in your decades of your lives, have seen anything that has moved this quickly, that has changed so quickly and has affected us differently, almost weekly, if not daily. So I want to talk about some of the highlights and then wrap up where I think we're going. So this is 11 months ago. And this is what we have done in 11 months. On New Year's Eve, China announced a pneumonia outbreak with a questionable link to a wholesale seafood market. And that seafood market also sold live animals and bats. And there has always been a question as to the source of this virus. And I will just tell you that it remains questionable. We do know that this is a bat virus. It's from a very small bat, not a large bat. But that's still about where we are. And then a month later, we had our first case in the United States. It was in the state of Washington. It was an individual who had traveled to Washington from China. At that time, we could not do a PCR test. That diagnosis was made by a virus culture, which is only done in specialized laboratories. And then a couple of weeks after that, was the Diamond Princess quarantine, where it was determined that there were a lot of travelers on a cruise ship, and that cruise ship was quarantined off of Yokohama, Japan. What we did, if you recall, is we sent special airplanes to Japan to bring back US citizens who were quarantined on that. And they came back to Travis Air Force Base, and then those who were sick were transferred to local hospitals. And that was my beginning of seeing patients with this disease. It was actually individuals from the Diamond Princess transferred to Travis Air Force Base and then transferred to the hospital when they were symptomatic. And right after that, this is just so remarkable. We have never done anything this quickly. Right after that, we identified the entire virus, not just the RNA, that's the nucleic acid of the middle of it. And you can see with the tweezers, that's the part that we use to develop the testing. But we identified the entire viral structure. And it's those pink spikes on the outside that determine the infectivity. There is a shell around it that looks like an eggshell of the blue dots that protects the RNA. We know so much about this virus in a few short months, and that has never happened with any virus, including the AIDS virus. We have never gone this far this quickly. So a lot of compliments to those who have worked so hard in the virus laboratories. Shortly after that, we had our first PCR test authorized in the United States. Now, we were not the first in the world And the reason there was a delay is because there was questions about the reliability of the World Health Organization PCR test, as well as the China PCR test. And ours was completely different. And we know in retrospect there were problems with it, but I can guarantee you it is all but perfected. Only uncommonly do we see problems, and usually that's with storage or transportation. Then it came home. We had another Princess cruise ship that was quarantined off of San Francisco, trying to decide what to do with it. And if you recall, that ship was brought into the port of Oakland with a great deal of public effort to quarantine and protect those people who may have been infected or exposed. And then the most controversial thing that has occurred, which sometimes gets a little too much press, is when the CDC said it is not necessary to wear masks or face coverings. Now, I want to stop there and say, this was the science at the time. And one axiom I learned long ago is that good science is self-correcting. And throughout this entire 11 months, many times we have made statements based on the knowledge that we have at the time, which is exactly what the public health officer is going to do today. You make a recommendation based on the knowledge at the time, and then if more information becomes available, then you alter that. It's not a criticism. That is the evolution of good science. And it was 1 month later that the CDC changed and said wearing masks is indeed protective. And then since then, we've talked about masks many times on this breakfast and the value of it. Our first stay-at-home order for Contra Costa County was in March, and that was 9 months ago. And the term flatten the curve became commonplace. And what it means is it doesn't prevent infections, it delays infections. The goal was that if we had so many people getting sick at one time, we could not accommodate them in our healthcare services. Much of what you saw in New York, when New York could not flatten the curve and they had individuals in hallways, makeshift hospitals, there were not enough ventilators. The goal was to slow down the spread, and then we could accommodate people at a better rate. And then there was the hydroxychloroquine. And I put this up for a reason, because there is some confusion about this. The FDA in the United States has invoked an opportunity to do an emergency authorization as opposed to approval. And I want to talk about that, because an emergency authorization means that the FDA says the risks outweigh the benefits. That's all. Therefore, in the time of a public emergency or a pandemic, it permits the use of a drug like hydroxychloroquine and many others. Approval is different. Approval is probably what you are used to prior to this pandemic. If you're taking a drug for cholesterol, or you're taking a drug for high blood pressure, or you're taking a blood for muscle pain, those are approved. And that means that the FDA has deemed them to be both safe and effective. That's not an emergency. So there isn't a difference between an authorization and approval. And so far, we only have one drug that has reached both, and that's remdesivir. I mentioned that a month after saying that face coverings were not recommended, they are now recommended, and continuing to be even more so as we get more good science. Remdesivir was the first drug that first got emergency authorization, but subsequently has been approved. And then things changed. The curve was flattening. Although we had this county closure, the stay-at-home order, or the shelter in place, if you will, it worked. And then there was the announcement of the slow reopening, and brilliantly done in phases, followed shortly by something that all of us have to understand. That is COVID fatigue. I had it, you had it, we all had it. Remember, in January, this thing was supposed to be over by June. We all got together, we all did what we were told. There was tremendous compliance and cooperation, but it didn't go away. we were still seeing problems. And I think COVID fatigue is completely understandable. And what happened when the compliance with masking, with social distancing, with not having public gatherings, when the compliance relaxed, well, then the cases increased and we had to unwind the reopening or start to invoke closures. This is human nature. This is not a criticism. I was in the crowd that said this is going to be temporary and we fully expect this to be under control by May, June. And indeed, it was not. And then the last are the highlights. We started to see in July the first of the promising results of early vaccine trials. And again, let me compliment everyone. We all deserve to applaud all of those in the United States who have worked on this. This was a disease that was first seen on New Year's Eve. And 7 months later, in 7 months, we're looking not only at the development of a vaccine, but promising results of a vaccine. Never in the world has anything moved this quickly. So this is another compliment to all of us in the United States as well as worldwide. And then there was the event of the Rose Garden. And I will tell you, this confused me. I was one of those people that said that coronavirus, COVID-19 is an indoor disease. Outdoor is safe. And I had to take pause as I'm watching the news and I'm looking at all of these individuals sitting outside. And then there clearly was a super spreader event. And like I said, good science is self-correcting, and I was prepared to self-correct with many of the things that I have said, that outdoor versus indoor is a huge difference. Until I was informed that both before and after the Rose Garden event, there were indoor meetings and a lot of hugging and cocktails and close conversations. And again, it appears that it was the indoor meetings of that announcement ceremony that was the result of the super spreader, not those sitting in the lawn of the Rose Garden. October 12th was important because we got the first reinfection confirmed. I've said this on this meeting. It is outrageously rare. Don't worry about it. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 in 12 million. Currently, it is still thought that if one gets infected, one is going to be immune for some period of time, and reinfection only occurs in individuals who have susceptibility due to biology or underlying disease. And then those 4 lines are the most important thing for the future. On November 9th, then November 16th, Pfizer BioNTech, followed by Moderna, announced that their vaccines were 95% effective. Then a few weeks later, both companies, 22nd for Pfizer, the 30th for Moderna, submitted their data to the FDA. December 1st, and you may recall this from the news just 3 days ago, the UK authorized the Pfizer vaccine to be given to the public. And the date for us is December 10. So December 10 is the day that our FDA will meet and decide whether to grant emergency authorization or approval to the vaccines. So that's going to be a very, very important day. And I just want to warn you, if they look at the information and say it doesn't look good, they will not authorize it. The FDA will not compromise. But if they do authorize or approve this drug or the vaccines, that means that a lot of very brilliant people have looked at it. And I can give you a little bit of inside information. They have been looking at the data from the vaccines since late July, early August, and it looks very, very good. So I am optimistic that on December 10th, we are going to get a nice announcement about the availability of a vaccine. So much so that we are preparing in California, in our county, nationwide, for distribution of the vaccine. So this is another thing that has happened in 2020. We have some new language that is completely different from what it was a year ago. A corona had a completely different meaning than what it does now. PCR were three letters that most people a year ago couldn't spell. They meant nothing to anybody, and now it is common knowledge that that is the gold standard for testing. Zoom was something that came out of a hot rod, and quarantine was something you did to your kids when they were acting up. Face coverings were Halloween. Social distancing is what you did from relatives you didn't like. And herd immunity was something that no one had ever heard of. Again, the stay-at-home order was for those who misbehaved, and flattening the curve was probably something that was limited to a cosmetic surgeon. So all of these are new language. They are common language. They are everywhere. And it kind of exemplifies how profound and how widespread this particular pandemic has come. Now, I want to talk a little bit about activity. If we talk about a brush fire or a forest fire, there's many statistics we can talk about. How many acres have been damaged, how many people it has displaced, how much money it has caused. But the decisions that we make are based on activity, not on any other statistic. So the other statistics are critically important, certainly the number of people who have died or the number of people who are still very ill. This is what determines what we do. This is what Supervisor Anderson was talking about, what our health officer is looking at. And I just picked April, which was 8 months ago, and December, to show you what has happened. The activity is up, and I probably could have picked a month ago and shown similar increases in activity. This is the United States, an 8-fold increase in the number of new tests per day, a 5-fold increase in the number of people in a hospitalization. And if you want to look at our county, just whack off 3 zeros. Go back to April for our county, approximately 25 cases a day. And now approximately 200. Hospitalizations in Contra Costa County in April, about 20 people in the hospital, now about 100, give or take. So it's this activity that is determining what we are going to have to do for the next few weeks. But as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I want to emphasize now. We have major game changers coming soon, coming so quickly that I really want to encourage everyone to listen to what the health officers are saying. This is something that is much different from what we talked about in March of this year. We have 3 proven opportunities to change this pandemic. Vaccines look absolutely fantastic. I talked last time about the messenger RNA vaccine. These are inexpensive, easy to prepare. We'll have hundreds of millions of doses that can be prepared within the next few months. The rapid testing. Imagine this. Imagine if you want to have a bunch of family over for a gathering in your house, and that all they need to do is to spit in a cup and drop in a little piece of litmus paper and see if it turns blue or red. And that will determine if they are infectious. That is coming. Do the same in school, do the same in workplaces. On their way in, a 5-minute test, you can identify who may be contagious and who is not. And lastly, the big game changes are drug therapy. There are now 5 drugs that clearly change the course of event. And one of them is pills. So we are really getting better with over 100 different drugs in clinical trials right now, all of them being very, very important. And so I just want to congratulate everybody for a tough year. I understand COVID fatigue. We got through it. Try not to get it now, because with these game changers, we really think that what we have to do now to flatten the curve, to save lives, not to overwhelm our hospitalizations, not to overwhelm our critical caregivers. This will be something that is going to change very soon. And my last slide is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek slide that those of you who didn't go to college when I did may remember something known as MD 2020, also known as Mad Dog 2020. This was made by Mogen David. It was a fruit-flavored wine that was very common on college campuses. And I certainly don't remember anything about it except the next day on how bad I felt. But I got through it. I survived 2020 once. I can do it again. So can you. So congratulations to everyone. Be proud of yourselves. Be proud of our country. Be proud of all of us for what we have had to do over the last 11 months. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Mayor, thank you for all of the invitations to join you. It has indeed been a pleasure over the past many months. I've learned something every time and had a privilege to offer something.
All right, for Dr. Joseph, we do have a few questions. One about seniors in their 60s and 70s, how they may react differently to the virus. There's a question about were they included in the phase 3 clinical trials?
Yes, they were. So as one ages, and it's hard to put a chronological age to say there's a difference between 50, 60, 70, 80, because we all have different biology. But as one ages, there is a change in the immune system. That change in the immune system is responsible for those individuals having more severe disease. So as we started off in the beginning of this, saying that those of advanced age are more likely to get sicker, more likely to be hospitalized, and have an increased rate of complications, it's now clearly related to specific defects in the immune system. So that explains that. However, they seem to respond very well to vaccines, and individuals of all ages were included in some of the vaccine trials. So one has to spread this out among all ages, certainly among all ethnic backgrounds, among those with risk factors. So we don't have a whole lot in every field, but yes, everyone was included.
And then a follow-up question, how can we be sure that the vaccine will not have long-term side effects?
We can't. We absolutely can't. Brilliant question. And nor can we from anything that is recently released. So I think it's a valid question. We have certainly have less than 6 months information on anyone who has received two doses of vaccine. So it's not possible to predict. What we can say is that we will certainly watch. But let me also say this for other vaccines. We have vaccines that we get every day, and the influenza vaccine that we have received every year changes every year. So the flu vaccine that's available for this flu season of 2021 is different from the one from last year and from the year before. We almost never have long-term effects. So we look at everything that we can look at, but the question is valid, can't deny it, and we just have to work through it.
Another question, vaccine related, with the Pfizer vaccine needing to be stored at such a low temperature, what viability checks are done at the vaccination site before it's administered?
Vaccines that require storage at that level, that is minus 80 centigrade or Celsius and minus 100 Fahrenheit, have an indicator with it. So imagine a box of vaccine, and let's just say there's 10 vials in there, and there's an indicator in it. And that indicator is specifically designed to change color if the temperature goes out of range. So when I order vaccines in my office, they arrive. The first thing we do is look at the indicator to see if the indicator turns from blue to red, that means at some point prior to delivery, there was a breach in the necessary temperature. Now, the Pfizer vaccine the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine needs to be maintained at minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 80 Celsius. Then after it is allowed to come to freezer temperature, it's good for 5 days. That's not mixed. So if it's still in the lyophilized vial, it's good for 5 days. And then after it's mixed, it's good for a few hours. So there's very well defined duration criteria by temperature.
Great, and we have a couple questions, and this is the final question. They're all related to, is the vaccine good, only good for preventing COVID, or does it help with patients who currently have COVID? Or if you had COVID, should you still get the vaccine?
Well, let's take them then as separately. The vaccine is designed only to prevent disease. The vaccine, different from some other immunizations, the vaccine is not part of the therapy of those with proven disease. So the goal is to prevent. Currently, there is not enough known about those who have had proven COVID. And I think I've mentioned this before. Those who have had COVID are managed identically to those who have not. That is, they still have to wear face covering, practice social distancing, avoid gatherings. Even though there's a lot of evidence that they may be immune, it's not conclusive. And then to finish your third question, yes, those who have had proven COVID are candidates for the vaccine.
Once you're vaccinated, it sounds as if the protocols around social distancing and masks will still apply to you. And when do we hit a threshold where the vaccinations become prevalent enough in the community where that doesn't occur anymore?
Within 6 months. So the vaccine trials, and I didn't want to get into too much of the numbers, but as most know, when one does a phase 3 trial, you have tens of thousands of people in the vaccine group and tens of thousands of people in the placebo group. And the reason the numbers look so good and the reason the optimism is so high is that in the vaccine group, there were 7 cases of COVID disease. In the placebo group, there were 162, implying that the vaccine is tremendously protective. Once the vaccine becomes available worldwide, and I'll just reflect on what we've talked about in the past, human experimentation is permitted in many countries, but not the United States. So there are many volunteers in other countries who will take the vaccine and then expose themselves intentionally to the virus in a closed room, in a phone booth type room. And if that proves effective, then we have reached the point that our target is proven immunity and then backing off.
So my question would be, in terms of the expectations that residents have, vaccinations are being given over the next 3 to 5 to 6 months. Half of the people get vaccinations. Will they still be continued to wear masks and social distance even after vaccinations? And when can people expect the vaccination percentage to be high enough where those behaviors don't have to occur?
Well, it's 2 questions, Mr. Mayor. If one proves that the vaccine provides immunity, then protective measures are not necessary. An individual is immune. If the vaccine does not have proven immunity yet, and it's a statistical number, not an immunological number, then the recommendations will continue. I would look for something between March and June.
Great. That's very helpful. Helping people manage their expectations is important. You've talked about the fatigue and when can people begin to, I hate to use the word relax, but if they get a shot, will there be cards they carry saying, I've got my vaccination, I don't have to do this, I can go shopping, I can go to a restaurant, or are we going to not do that for a period of time?
It is definitely being discussed. I must tell you, I've never seen this before, except traveling to certain countries where one has to show proof of yellow fever.
Yes.
Where you can't get into a country because they don't want you carrying yellow fever. We don't have anything else in the world that requires proof of immunization, but it is definitely being discussed for airplane travel. And it is possible. And I can tell you that I've seen some of the concepts, not proof of concept, but some of the concepts that to get on an airplane, you may need to show proof of vaccination. So
Interesting.
it's definitely being thought, it's a public safety measure, not intended to be anything else except to protect others who may not respond to the vaccine, who may be getting cancer chemotherapy, have underlying immunological diseases. It's not intended to be punishment, but rather to be protective and considerate.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Joseph, and thank you to everybody who's listening in our conference on our call today. And Dr. Joseph, I hope this is not the last time that the residents of San Ramon get a chance to hear your expertise, especially as this begins to draw to a close. I really want you there to share with us the accomplishments and to share how this comes to a close and hopefully how we can put this chapter behind us. And again, we appreciate, and through you, all the professionals who have done simply amazing work to bring forward vaccinations and the therapies. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.